So the reading this morning comes from what I consider really to be the first book in the Christian scriptures is Acts. It's a different world before Jesus ascends. And so after Jesus' ascension, the disciples returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet. When they entered the city, they went to the room upstairs where they had been staying. All these disciples were constantly devoting themselves to prayer, together with the women, including Mary, the mother of Jesus, as well as his brothers. My glasses are so fogging up. In those days, Peter stood among the believers, which numbered about 120 people, and said, "Friends, the scriptures had to be fulfilled." So one of the men who have accompanied us all from the time that Jesus went in and among us, beginning with the baptism of John until the day he was taken up from us, one of these must become a witness with us. So there were two, Joseph Barsabbas, who is also known as Justus, and Matthias. And then they prayed and said, "You, O God, know every one of us inside and out. Make plain which of these two men you choose to take the place of Judas." And so they cast lots for them, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was added to the 11 apostles. So we can do the hymn now if you would like. I'll introduce it. This probably, you're going to be glad we're singing softly because it's an old hymn. It's about 400 years old. And it reflects a lot of what the message is about. So I wanted to tell you a little of the backstory. Jorge, let's see.
Blue or green hymnal, please.
Green 251.
Thank you, sir. It is called "If Thou But Trust in God to Guide Thee." And as I was saying, Jorge Neumark, the German man who wrote this, was out of work. He had been traveling between 4 cities trying to find a job. He was in law school and couldn't quite find his place in the world. And when he wrote this hymn 400 years ago almost, it was when he had found work and had weathered through a difficult time. So it sounds like a funeral dirge to us in this era, but if you can kind of hear the era that it was written in, perhaps you'll be patient with it, and you can sing as softly as you need to get through. David, if you don't mind playing it through for us.
Sure. Yeah, I was about to. If you
be
hadn't
good.
asked him, I would.
Yeah. It is beautiful.
Let me know if I need to change the speed.
Okay. Beautiful. Very beautiful.
We will sometime.
This is gorgeous.
And only 3 verses, so there you go. So let us take a moment just to center ourselves. Let whatever you brought into this space rest outside the door. It'll be there when you leave. And let whatever concerns you brought in your heart, let them rest in that which is present to us all. We know there's no need to invoke the presence of God because we brought it with us. And there it stays among us and within us, wherever we go, whatever we do. May it be so. Amen. The flurry, the fury, the unexpected and the miraculous, the confusion and the clarity. This is where we have found ourselves in the past 12 months. And now, as we unfold out of our corona-created cocoons, to enter into this thing called a new normal, whatever that is. We're picking up the pieces in a post-COVID world. I've likened the past 14 months to a roller coaster ride. One of those fancy ones that I can see off the interstate when I go see my daughter near Carowinds. The kind that has several tracks running simultaneously. One track is fueled by COVID. Several tracks probably have been fueled by social justice issues over the past years. And a third track or more fueled by political and economic upset and unrest. All these tracks have been woven on so many different levels. So when we take a look at the believers in this story about them gathering after Jesus' resurrection and ascension, I imagine that they were probably feeling pretty similar. They've been through a lot in the past 3 years as they followed Jesus in his ministry, and especially in the past weeks that precede this story. Ups and downs, shocks and surprises. But in the end, somehow, all is well. The words of Jesus have come to life before their very eyes. And as we read, the scriptures have been fulfilled. They're fixed on continuing that hard work to bring joy, comfort, and peace to all who follow Jesus' teachings. But first, there's details to attend to. In order to be effective, they've got to create a full team of leaders. In today's reading, we find them gathered to choose a replacement for Judas from among those who had been with Jesus from the beginning. Out of the 120 present, there are 2 names that pop up, Matthias and Justus. And so, after praying over their decision, they draw straws, and Matthias becomes the next 12th disciple. These days, as we pick up the pieces of our lives that we were forced to lay down last March, we have a lot of details to tend to as well. Where do we begin picking up? When? And what pieces can we pick up? Some of what was laid down last year cannot be resumed. There were workshops and retreats that didn't happen, meetings, classes canceled, vacations scrapped, businesses closed, and jobs eliminated. There were holidays and birthdays that passed, Even if we were able to celebrate them very quietly, it was likely with such a small number you could count them on one hand. And on top of that, a lot of dreams that were in process a year ago had to be shifted and reshaped and maybe even delayed. I remember last March, maybe the 15th, standing at the wedding venue with my daughter. We were talking about, oh, flowers here, tables there, daddy there, mama here. And in that time, like 3 days, that was all off the table. A lot of lives have been shifted and reshaped as well with loss and unpredictable events. This year, if you think about it, nothing could be taken for granted. Work, school, routines, relationships, freedom. Even going to the grocery store for the first time brought me such a rush of adrenaline. I felt like I was on a roller coaster. Probably had the same effect. So it's likely this band of believers that gathered that day in Jerusalem must have felt something similar. After a tumultuous time, they are standing on the brink of something new. They don't know what it is. They don't know what it's going to look like. But they know it's a continuation of the past and yet different. Like us, I wonder if they saw themselves living in historical times, a pivotal time in which nothing would ever be the same. Their time was so significant, it altered the trajectory of humanity in its wake. I also find myself wondering, how can we follow their example from this group that had been through so much together? What practices have we adopted over the past year that we could continue to serve us in the future? On the other hand, what is it that we did that was only for the season of quarantine and solitude? So I backed up and did a closer reading of Acts 1. And I saw there are steps there that would help us launch into this new beginning. First off, I'm intrigued that they went back to the upper rooms. This was the place they were before things seemed to run off the tracks. It's familiar to them, maybe even a touchstone. Could be they've stayed there several times. Bernice Reagan, who is one of the founders of the all-black women's a cappella group, Sweet Honey in the Rock, if you've ever heard of them. Bernice wrote, "If in moving through your life you find yourself lost, go back to the last place where you knew who you were and what you were doing and start from there." And it seems to me that's what these believers were doing. They went back to the place that they were at last a unified team with Jesus in the center. Second, do you notice that all of those who were part of Jesus' ministry are present? Everyone. Not just the remaining 11 disciples deciding this is the way it's going to be, but everyone was included. Although the majority clearly had not been with them from the beginning. If they could only come up with 2 people to replace Judas, the majority were not there. But they were all there for that first important decision. I kind of think about the Hebrews refusing to move forward in the desert without Miriam. They said, no, we're not leaving her. We're not leaving without her. The disciples decided to move forward with all of those who were committed to Jesus' ministry. I don't know about you, but I've kind of grown accustomed to flying solo these past 12 months. You know, it's really easy to charge forward like Indiana Jones from here on out because I've just been making my own choices. But who would be omitted if I did that? Tracy probably would say me. But whose voice needs to be at the table? Whether it's at home, here in meeting, or anywhere else. It might be the voice of reason. It might be the voice of compassion. It might be the voice of our inner teacher and other people's inner light that we're overlooking in our rush to get back to normal. I think of my neighbor, Nancy, who in her late 80s was not able to get out even before COVID. It would be so easy to leave her behind after all these months of making sure our neighbors were okay. The third consideration is that the disciples took stock, which was really fascinating. They named their situation. Judas did some really bad things. And then they named the issue at hand. We need to replace him. Peter summarized it succinctly in that the scriptures had been fulfilled, and down to the hard reality that Judas's betrayal and departure had left a vacancy. They were also very clear about what was needed to be able to move forward. In fact, they were really specific. They knew what would serve them best. Someone who had been there from the beginning, from the time Jesus was baptized to the day he ascended. They named it very well. They narrowed the possibilities so significantly, but it helped them stay focused on what was needed. Throughout this past year of coronavirus, we've actually been given opportunities to be focused in all of our activities. We could be thoughtful in how we planned our days. We had to be careful about how we moved around in the world. So I wonder, are there threads of integrity that we can carry forward by continuing to act intentionally and thoughtfully? Pause and think before we act. Can you get specific about what's most important to you after a year of seclusion and separation? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about your world that you want to take with you into your own new normal? What's most needed for you from here on out? And how do you continue to honor that in some way, shape, or form? The most striking detail to me is that the disciples prayed together. That's from the very beginning. They went to the upper rooms and they prayed. They not only prayed the day they had a decision to make, they wove their days with prayer. They prayed a prayer that echoes Psalm 139. "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me." There's no running. They acknowledge in their prayer that God knows the heart of everyone present. And they find a way to honor that in their gathering. Flipping back to chapter 17 in the book of John, we read a similar prayer that Jesus made before his crucifixion on behalf of the disciples. It's a rather lengthy prayer, but in it, he asked God to protect these people who become almost like family to him, so that they may have my joy made complete in them as they go out into the world on his behalf. Jesus and these who have gathered to select the next disciple convey a trust that their prayers will be answered. I wonder how often we lean into the understanding that God knows each of us, including us, inside and out, including our light. And do we, like the old hymn, carry everything to God in prayer? Do we trust that the answer we've heard? And do we accept it without questioning the answer we receive? As we begin to pick up the pieces of our former lives, as we explore the possibilities of a new normal in a post-corona world, let's remember this example lived out by the first disciples. Start with what you know. Start with where you were, acknowledging what's at hand and naming what's needed, without overlooking anyone before you move forward. Act with careful focus, integrity, and thoughtful intention. And once you've carried everything to God in prayer, trust the answers you receive. And so it is. Amen.